The grove seemed more chaotic than the last time they'd passed the gates. The tieflings were packing what they could manage, save for what they still needed for everyday living, and now more druids seemed to be up and about as well. Some mingling for last bouts of trade, others watching from a distance with cold attention. The air was tense, uncertain. "Come on, this way, this way!" Karlach yelled, leading everyone toward a long line of oxen placidly waiting to be shod. One ox huffed as Karlach passed, and she rounded on it. "Oi, when I want a cow's opinion, I'll give it to you. Shouldn't this be the least surprising place for folks to understand an ox?" Well, sorry, Mr. Clever Clogs. Karlach rolled her eyes and pressed onward. "Damon, you up there, mate?" "Be right with you," he called, gently fixing a shoe to the outside claw of an ox while the young druid soothed the beast. "Oh, Karlach, what a pleasant surprise." "Too right, and I've got an even bigger one," she grinned, pulling the infernal iron from her bag. "Ta-da!" "Oh, wow," Damon breathed, accepting it and wincing slightly. "Definitely sounds authentic. Seems like it came off of armor rather than a war machine. Should make it a little easier to work. Although with what tools I've got here..." He trailed off with a sigh, looking down at the wooden mallet in his hand. "The druids say ironwood is just as good, but who uses a wooden hammer for blacksmithing?" "Ha! We liberated some tools, too, if you need 'em," Karlach said, beginning to pull an assortment of rusted tools from her bag. "They spent some time, underwater. Hope that's not too much of a problem?" "Well, I've seen worse," Damon smiled. "Let me clean these up a bit, fix them to some new handles. Should be able to get these rehabilitated and in working order fairly quickly. That'll help this job go faster too," he said, gesturing to the long line of work animals. "Don't want any of them slipping and hurting their hooves on the road. I can be a farrier in a pinch, but a veterinarian? Completely outside of my wheelhouse." "Yeah, I'd hate to make the trip to Baldur's Gate without shoes too," Karlach said. "Oh, we found a bunch of other blacksmithing stuff while we were out. Most of it probably ain't great for someone on the move, though. Ingots and such. What say we stash it all for safekeeping and let you know where you can pick it up once you're settled in somewhere?" "I'd say that's fine payment, but the opportunity to work on your engine is more than enough for now," Damon smiled. "Let me just finish this foot, then I'll see what I can do for you." "If you're going to be a little while, I'll check in with Zevlor and Korga," Simon said. "It doesn't seem like they've killed each other, but things seem different," he mused. "Zevlor's trying to keep everyone's spirits up before we hit the road," Damon remarked, adjusting the inside claw shoe before pulling out a nail from his apron pocket. "We're all just hoping the road is clear before the druids shut the door on us." "Simon is a prophet. I'm sure he'll figure something out," Karlach grinned. "Yes, that's what I wanted to speak to them about. Korga's inside, I wager?" Simon asked. "As she ever is," Damon sighed, hammering away as gently as he could. The shade of the inner sanctum felt better than Simon expected, but all was quiet. Even the gurgle of water in the spring seemed to be holding its breath. "Korga?" Simon called. "First druid?" "Who's there?" Wrath, the brow-beaten druid from before, emerged from the infirmary Simon and the others had previously passed through. "Oh, it's you," he said, a bit of nervous anticipation in his tone. "Why have you returned?" "I wanted to show the first druid our progress. I hoped that she might hold off on evicting the tieflings if she knows they'll be willingly gone sooner rather than later," Simon explained. "You're too late, I fear," Wrath said. "Korga's going to get the final implements needed to complete the ritual. As soon as she's back, it's over," he said, his tone grave. "I tried talking the others into delaying, but..." "Where did she go?" Simon asked, stepping closer. "Not sure. She just said she was making final preparations and she needed to gather a few more things," Wrath said. "I'm just trying to do as much good as I can before all is said and done." "I understand. Maybe have a look around. See if we can find a clue to where she went." I reckon I can't stop you, Roth said carefully, looking from Simon to the others. Simon dropped his gaze in guilt, glancing away. The first druid's chambers are right through there. Thank you, Roth, Simon murmured, waving for the others to follow after him. So, we're looking for whatever these final implements are, then? Will asked, casting his gaze around the room they found themselves in. No, that's less important, Simon said quietly, beginning to flip through loose sheets of parchment and birch bark on the stone slab desk. We need to know where she went. She didn't tell anyone where she was going, and she's got a head start. So depending on how far she's gone, we might yet catch her. Or wait for her to return and confront her. We need time. We need her to see sense. Shadowheart picked up one of the pages, frowning. Doesn't look like any language I've seen. Some sort of code? Could be, Will mused, picking up a page and closing his good eye, scanning over the lines with his eye of stone instead. No, it seems to be a language. I can't decipher codes with this thing, but I can read any writing I come across. This is not one I've ever seen, though. Code or not, I can't imagine Korga would leave anything she intended to keep secret out in the open. Search for hidden compartments, lockboxes, false bottoms, Simon instructed, wiping the sweat from his brow. Was today really that much hotter? The room was rather cramped, given that Cog had only been first druid for a few days, but still had plenty of nooks and crannies to search. In many places, Halsin's things had simply been pushed aside in a jumble. A half-carved duck and wood shavings were scattered across the floor, along with treatises on the spell plague, mind flayers, and the Shadowfell. Simon raised a brow, pulling the last one from the piles and flipping through the pages. There were extensive notes and annotations, both in practiced courtly scripts and a more humble hand. The other texts shared the heavy annotations from multiple scribes, though none matching the sharp writing on what he presumed were Kagha's papers. Well now, Astarion's voice called from an unseen location. Someone didn't want anyone to find this. The sound of a lock clicking open quickly followed before Astarion sauntered out of a disguised alcove, a sheaf of papers held aloft triumphantly. Though she was rather sloppy in hiding it. Must have been in quite the hurry. Brilliant, Simon smiled, clearing space on the desktop. Let's have a look. The pages were loosely bound with braided sinew and twine into something resembling a book, which Will began reading out carefully. Faldorn's Canticle. Any ideas? Can't say I'm familiar with the name, Simon replied. Will frowned as he read, before his brows rose in shock. Good gods! She's a shadow druid, he whispered. Bloody hells, we're lucky she hasn't started slaughtering the tieflings already. She's likely the only one, or one of them anyway. She's trying to consolidate power, Shadowheart remarked. It's little wonder she hasn't acted yet. Once the grove is closed, though, she'll have a captive audience. This'll be a shadow druid enclave before the year is out. Clever. Will picked up a loose page, the marks crisscrossing the page not looking scribed so much as slashed. Eureka, he said, holding the page aloft. She's headed to meet someone named Olodon at the swamps. He tucked the pages away in his pack and turned for the door. Let's go. Do we have to go now? Astarion whined. I don't know how you adventure types handle all this running around. I'm exhausted. Tired or not, we've got to press on, Will said. In spite of the cool air in the inner sanctum, Simon couldn't help but notice the sheen of sweat on Will's brow, as well as the slight wince as he breathed. We did travel quite a lot today. All the way to Avernus and back, Simon said with a hint of cheek. And last time we fought a druid and weren't at our best. Well, we can't sit by and let Korga do whatever she pleases, Will insisted. She's done enough of that. Simon's right, Will, Shadowheart said. Fighting a shadow druid with nothing to lose. And if she's meeting someone, she won't be alone. We need to prepare for a confrontation. And I don't feel well. You do look a little paler than usual, Astarion remarked, brushing the back of his cool hand against her forehead theatrically. Touch me again and a stake will be the least of your worries, she growled. Come along, everyone, let's not make ourselves unwelcome guests. Wrath, Simon called, striding into the main chamber. Do you know of any swamps around here? There's some marshy land where the Chionthar turns, Wrath answered, southwest of here. Unfriendly fair folk have been spotted there for a few centuries, so we steer clear. Why? I think I know where our wayward first druid is gone, Simon said, grim. Everyone, let's gather Karlach, then head back to camp. We need a plan. And perhaps we'll all feel better with something in our stomachs? Simon let the others go ahead, flexing and curling his aching fingers. They felt stiff, clumsy, a death sentence for a wizard. This morning's rather been a lot, he murmured to himself. You feel it too, Lae'zel observed, her voice oddly soft as well. Feel what? Tentacles curling around your heart, piercing your stomach, your bones popping, flesh swelling. We are lost, she said. Simon stopped on the stone steps, waiting for her furious rejoinder, but none came. The anger from this morning was gone, replaced with a grim determination. Don't say that. We can still make it to the creche. We do not know its location. We have clues, but no coordinates, no distance. Even if we hadn't stopped marching from the moment we woke, we might not have had enough time. I should have pushed harder for purification. We grew comfortable, while the tadpoles inside us grew fat. Now we reap our reward. Lae'zel, please be reasonable. We haven't been showing any symptoms. We have time. This could just be a spot of something moldy from dinner last night. Likely even given what we've been eating, Simon said, reaching out and giving her arm a reassuring squeeze. Come tomorrow. We'll feel better. I promise. She looked down at his hand, waiting to see if the skin would peel back. Seemingly satisfied, she turned her golden gaze up to him, and for one fleeting moment, she looked vulnerable, small. You say you see what is to come, and I want to believe you. Tell me, she said quietly, do you see a future where we are all alive tomorrow? Simon frowned. He was already reaching for numbers, calculating, sifting, charting. His gaze slipped away, peering forward as he sorted possibilities into probabilities, tabulating futures. I see many futures where we all wake tomorrow, Simon said. I see a fair few where you slit our throats in our sleep. Some where Shadowheart does it. At least one where Astarion tears our throats out in bloodthirsty madness. I see futures that end abruptly with Gale. Futures without Karlach, or Will, but the rest of us soldiering on with our heads hanging low. I see a ward shattering. I see wings of black and wings of white. I see a blood-stained queen wiping us from existence. I see a great temple falling around us. I see an army with no general. I see a lost prince, found, then lost again. I see wingless dragons with teeth like daggers. I see archdukes of the hells. I see nigh countless souls bound in blood. I see towering figures staring, faces lit in blue-white. I see him, I see him, I see him, I see... Lae'zel's calloused hand struck Simon's cheek. He blinked, the sting clearing the haze from his vision. Why was he kneeling on the floor? I'm sorry, Simon said, slightly dazed. Forgive me, I seem to have gotten swept up in the moment, he murmured, slowly standing. Lae'zel stared, wide-eyed, as he rose and brushed his aching knees. You truly are a Senjasi. I trust your visions. Provisionally, she added. If we have worsened by morning, then I will be forced to take action. I'll start with you, then the others, then myself. I think I appreciate that, Lae'zel. Thank you, Simon said. It is the same consideration you gave the owlbear hatchling, she said, walking past him to climb the stairs back into the afternoon sun. A mercy killing. It was a long moment before Simon could will himself into moving from the darkness of the stair and back into the light. It was as Withers had said. He was gambling with lives, and the final ante was nearly at hand. He was halfway to the front gate when a familiar voice called to him. "Oh, Petal, there you are!" Simon turned and found the hunched, smiling form of Auntie Ethel, the old alchemist woman who had been peddling her wares to the refugees. She looked to have packed most of her goods and was preparing to leave ahead of the completion of the ritual, all the better to get a roadside stand set up before the tieflings found out what they needed most, Simon presumed. "Oh, you look like a dog's dinner, don't you?" "A pleasure to see you too, ma'am," Simon said, offering a gracious bow, the sort that he knew old ladies liked to receive from handsome young nobles. "We're a little run down, perhaps, but all things considered, we could be looking a lot worse." "That's what I'm worried about, Petal," she said, leaning close and dropping her voice to a whisper. "How you're getting on with your little problem, You said you were going to ask the healer here about it, but I'm afraid she's been murdered," she continued, barely concealing excitement in her hushed tone. Yes, I heard there'd been some nasty business involving the line of succession here," Simon deflected expertly. Pity. "So where does that leave you, dearies?" Simon hesitated. Their options were growing slimmer by the minute. Try to run for the vague promise of a Githyanki creche and leave the tieflings to the whims of Kagha? Or seek to make a deal with the devil? "We are exploring all our options," Simon said evenly. "I do hope you'll all take me up on my offer. I may have something that'll drive out a worm," she said lowly with a knowing glint in her eye. "I know it works for horses anyway," she laughed, cutting the tension in the air with expert skill. "I've got a cottage by the river, a fine little nook where I can find all manner of mushrooms and herbs for my lotions and potions. Just follow the high road and turn off south. I've walked the path for almost 80 years, Petal. It's a well-worn little track. Should be easy to find, dearie. I'll be headed home this afternoon. Seems business is getting all wrapped up here. Why don't you come by and I'll make you all a cuppa, all right?" "I certainly appreciate the invitation. We'll come by when we can," Simon said, smiling in return. From the sound of it, it would be on the way to the swamp. Perhaps a spot of tea and a potential solution to the tadpoles could be their reward for stopping Kagha. "Simon!" Will called. "Come on, we're burning daylight." "Oh, dear me, did he always have such impressive horns?" Ethel asked, her brows rising. "Or was that you all trying to solve your little problem yourself?" She grinned, barely suppressing her glee. "He makes a handsome devil, doesn't he?" she tittered, turning toward her fully loaded little cart. "Ta-ta, Petal! Remember to stop by and see your dear old auntie." It was mid-afternoon, with the sun still high in the sky, when Simon and the others returned to camp and found Gale tending a cauldron of simmering stock. "Oh, welcome back. I wasn't expecting you all so early," Gale said, skimming the top of the stock. "Just making myself a late lunch. I spent so long poring over that spell circle on an empty stomach, I think I made myself ill." Good thinking, Karlach said, plopping down next to the fire with a sigh. Wondered why I wasn't feeling much better after getting the old ticker worked on. Empty stomachs all round, I guess. Simon glanced over at Lae'zel for a moment before moving to Gale's side. 2 heads are better than 1. As soon as we've all had something, let's both get back to work. Shouldn't you all be investigating that village or the subterranean labyrinth beneath? I've set up a waystone and everything for you. Oh, that's permanent? Simon asked, eyes wide. Until I break the sigil here or a good spring rain comes through. But I think we're out of the season of that now. Have I told you lately how brilliant and handsome you are? Simon grinned, turning to retrieve the stack of bowls drying in the sun on the riverbank. In any case, there's been a development, Will said, taking charge and pulling out the documents he'd snagged from Kagha's chambers, now far less concerned with theft than the first time they'd come through the Emerald Grove. Kagha's a bloody shadow druid. This ritual of theirs, the Rite of Thorns, it's dark magic. Well, that would explain some things. Not a lot, but some, Gale said, beginning to ladle out the simple soup into the mismatched bowls Simon brought. We know she's headed to a swamp to meet someone and get the final pieces for the ritual, but we don't know how long we've got before she can finish the job, Will said, wiping his brow. I reckon if we set up watch along the trail to that hidden entrance the kids told us about, we can catch her on the way back at the very least. Easy, Tiger, Karlach said, waving him down a bit. Let's get something in our bellies first. You don't look any better than the rest of us feel, mate. Let's just take it easy for now. Simon frowned for a moment before sighing and snapping his fingers, Mortimer appearing already coiled around his digits. Mortimer, would you be a dear and stand watch for me? I'll show you where. You may not leave except to tell me if this woman is approaching. Or any animal directly approaching. Understood? Don't just nod, tell me you understand. All right. If you help us catch this woman, I'll let you have a frog. A little one. Yes, yes. Now go, I'll be watching. I don't like sitting around like this. If we're getting worse, I want to do as much good as I can before... Will trailed off. Let's not talk like that. If this is a delayed onset, we still have a little time to find the creche. Simon looked over to Lae'zel, who had almost immediately returned to her sharpening wheel with grim determination. He sipped the broth and insisted to himself that he felt better afterward. And if we're getting worse, I'd like to be able to say I worked alongside an Archmage of Waterdeep on the invention of a new magical tool. He smiled wistfully. I'll be sure to record the details in my journal. Worst comes to worst, we're published posthumously. Good news, everyone! Gale announced as he approached the campfire, his eyes twinkling in the evening light. Your wizards in residence have developed a solution to our long-distance covert communication problem. Now, I'm sure you're all wondering why we asked some of you for your items of jewelry earlier this afternoon. Are we having a magic show? I haven't been to one of those since I was this high, Karlach grinned. Magic, yes. Show, not so much, Gale answered, a good-natured smile on his face. Performing the same ritual 7 times in a row is not particularly interesting to watch, hence why we've spared you the tedium. And may I just say, once again, what an honor it has been to work with you on this little project of yours, Sage Sicarios. Simon smiled, breathless and with a touch of theatrics. You've said it 4 times now, Gale replied as an aside, his smile growing a little embarrassed. And it was our project. We're all in this together. The honor remains mine, and it has been an honest all 4 times, sir, Simon said, bowing. So what's your solution? Will asked, bringing the conversation blessedly back to the topic at hand. Yes, thank you, Will. While we know our stowaways allow us some level of unobtrusive communication at short range, that seems to be limited to about a stone's throw. Excepting, of course, some of our more proficient stone throwers, Gale said, gesturing to Karlach and Lae'zel. It also seems to require some level of acknowledgement between both parties to open that channel of communication between 2 speakers, for lack of a better term, past arm's length. With a bit of inspiration and spell design from us, we've developed these. Gale smiled, brushing his hair back to show off his earring, the polished silver holy symbol of Mystra catching the light more spectacularly than one might ordinarily expect. I hardly think you can claim originating the concept of earrings, Astarion said. especially given you've been wearing that bauble since we met you. Ah, yes, but before it couldn't do this. Karlach, could you assist in our demonstration, please? Yes! She pumped her fist and shot to her feet in an instant, jogging to the far side of the fire. Looking up into her eager face, Gale cleared his throat with a bit of a smile. Miss Cliffgate, do you recognize the earring I am presenting to you? Gale asked, holding out what appeared to be a beast's fang, etched with fine detailing capped in gold. I certainly do, she grinned. Would my lovely assistant please take Miss Cliffgate over to that crumbling ruin across the way? The running water should be sufficient to drown out any possibility of overhearing. And Shadowheart, if you will take yours back as well. This way, please, Karlach. Simon smiled, gesturing grandly towards the little temple and its fallen log bridge. I really, truly am excited about these, and Gale's charm work is lovely. Lovely? You sound smitten, Karlach grinned. Have fun studying together, did you? No, it's not like that, I assure you. Simon laughed, his cheeks warming at the implication. Gale was handsome, but from the war stories they'd all traded yesterday around the fire, he'd been consort to a goddess. Some desperate, bony half-elf certainly couldn't compare. Not that he presumed Gale's interest anyway. Wizards tended to be quite straightforward about their affections and desires, and he'd given no suggestion to having anything but survival on his mind. It seemed time to admit that ship had not only sailed, but had never set course to come into his port anyhow. This was purely practical work. I'm quite proud of my contributions, meager as they are compared to an Archmage of Waterdeep, he smiled. It's certainly a highlight of my arcane career. Right. Please put your earring on, touch it with Gale in mind, and if he were here in front of you now, tell him we are ready to demonstrate. What, out loud? Yes, please. The earring will capture the sound of your voice and transmit it to the intended recipient. It'll capture whatever volume you use, though, so no need to yell. No matter how far? Presuming you're on the same plane as the intended recipient, yes. Brilliant, she grinned, reaching up and hooking the earring back into place. Hi, Gale! We are ready to demonstrate, Karlach enunciated, looking over at Simon for confirmation and giving him an excited thumbs up. Hearing you loud and clear, Karlach. Gale's voice flowed into Karlach's ear as clearly as if he were standing in Simon's place. Now, I need you to attempt to connect to Shadowheart in the same way. And to prove you're hearing me, his voice dropped to a whisper, please describe the stuffed bear in your tent to Shadowheart for me. At the fireside, Shadowheart reeled for a moment as Karlach's voice rang so loud in her ear she would have been surprised if Gale didn't hear it just sitting next to her. Clive is my baby! He's got to have some stuffing replaced and he's a little singed, but he's my little buddy. I've had him since I was about 5, 6. He goes with me everywhere, even to the hells. He's such a trooper. Oh, that was probably a bit loud, wasn't it? Yes, it was, Shadowheart replied. But it definitely demonstrated the effectiveness of these earrings. Excellent. Karlach, please bring Simon back to camp with you and we'll start distribution, Gale instructed. Smashing little trick, Karlach called as she led Simon back across the fallen log. Well, now that we're all back, we're going to need to attune everyone who didn't provide earrings, Simon said, looking at the remaining members of camp, all with conspicuously unpierced ears. Why did you say attune like that? Will asked, frowning slightly. Well, for those with pierced ears, their jewelry was already something like a part of them, Simon began. But the rest of these, well, they've never been worn by anyone here. The magic targets the person, not the earring, and, well, magic does not come without a price, he continued, pulling a fine silver needle from among his spell components. That sounded positively ominous. I'm in. Astarion grinned, flashing his fangs in the firelight. We did try to select styles that would be, unobtrusive for those not providing their own materials, Gale said sheepishly, and I'm sure between all of us this will be mostly painless. My people usually use cuffs or braces for such coordination tools, rather than a ritual scarification, Lae'zel began. But for a practical purpose I am willing. Give me pain. That leaves Will and Simon? I suppose I'll be handling yours last, Gale said, searching for a needle as well. I've already disappointed my father. Why not add an ear piercing to it? Will sighed, reluctantly leaving his place and moving to Gale's side. Indeed, if we survive this, then I'll worry about my mother. Simon chimed in sympathetically, though his attention was focused on passing the needle through the fire held at his fingertip and not burning himself in the process. I went to a birthday party like this once, Karlach laughed, plopping down next to Will. Door ended up with 2 holes right next to each other because Epiphany lost her nerve punching it through. Karlach, please don't tell me how this is going to go wrong, Will whined, though there seemed to be a hint of jest returning to his tone. Oh, Gale, your fingers are freezing. They are. To try and dull the pain, he smiled, a thin layer of rime collecting at his fingertips as he gently pinched Will's earlobe. Wait, left side or right? Does it matter? Simon asked, holding a hot needle just above Lae'zel's scalloped earlobe. Left. Don't want to stab myself in the air reaching up to it now, do I? Will reasoned after a moment. Lae'zel, do you have a preference? Simon asked, rather more matter-of-fact than Gale. No, I am not afraid of mishandling my blade and injuring myself. No preference for me either, darling. I can go either way, Astarion said, smirking in Simon's direction. I don't know how much longer we all have. Starting today, we've all begun to feel ill, and while I cannot rule out that something suspect made it into our dinner last night, I'm choosing to work from the worst-case scenario. Ceremorphosis is beginning. Our options are very few. Lae'zel's lost her zeal for seeking the creche, and is now seemingly content with a more direct approach. Regardless if this is merely a delayed onset, we should have at least 2 more days before symptoms become debilitating. We may yet be able to reach salvation. If not, we will reach a swift end. Our other choice is Raphael, the Cambion who offered us a deal this morning. Though, oddly enough, he seemed to think we would have more time to amuse him with our efforts. I would like to avoid this option if at all possible. Karlach and Will are both evidence of what comes of deals with devils, and I'd hate to sign over the souls of myself and my companions without their blessing, no pun intended. Auntie Ethel reminded us this afternoon at the Grove that she may have a solution to our problem. I still think she's merely hoping to get several illithid tadpoles to keep in jars for her laboratory, wherever it may be. Still, even if she's a crackpot old fool, at least my soul will travel the track between the stars instead of being a token for a devil. We're going to do our best to use what little time we have left to do as much good as possible, as Will so ardently desires. Kagha's in league with the Shadow Druids, a misanthropic circle that would sooner see the refugees from Elturel dead and all of us along with them. Little wonder she was so callous with the life of a child. We hope to catch her in the midst of these dealings, that we might turn her over to the custody of the Emerald Grove Circle for judgment. Many druids there are suspicious of her, but afraid to rock the boat. They'd have little to fear if her duplicity was exposed for all to see. And we would save many lives in the process, by buying the tieflings precious time to prepare for their arduous journey. And then it's a matter of getting to the creche as quickly as possible, to save ourselves. I imagine even Gale and I would find the stamina necessary to make double time to save our skins, and hair, and teeth, and fingernails. Speaking of Gale, I'm including here the notes and sigils necessary to replicate the whispering earrings that Gale and I have designed and created over the past few days. I don't know if our time would have been better spent in other ways, but I do know that I've enjoyed working at his side. Perhaps in another life we might have been proper colleagues. Perhaps in another life I might have suited his tastes. But I do know that I've enjoyed this short friendship immensely. My time with Shadowheart has been precious to me, too. It's been so comforting, not worshipping alone, sharing this little patch of nowhere with someone. Her devotion reminds me of my own in my younger days, striving both to be noticed and to live up to the high expectations of my Mother Superior.
I rather hope the issue of the Gith relic cannot be solved at the creche. I do not want Shadowheart to be punished for failure of her mission. I know what gods and goddesses like mine and hers can be like, let alone their mortal representatives. Perhaps I ought to eulogize them all while I still have the mind for it. Lae'zel may not know it, but she's an inspiration to me. Her unwavering compass is commendable, even if I don't always want to go in the direction it points. Everyone fell in line behind me, for good or for ill, but she was never afraid to stand up and give me her opinion on my decisions. And then, even if she disagreed, she followed without complaint. She and Karlach are both ideal soldiers, and I'll be grateful to the both of them for the rest of my admittedly numbered days. Karlach has kept my spirits up through it all. Her zest for life is unmatched. She's a woman used to living every day like it's her last, and she has showed us all how to follow in that course. I'm glad we did what we could to stabilize her engine in these last days. She deserves to not have to worry about which was going to kill her first, her head or her heart. I want to shake her hand in thanks, or give her the strongest hug I can muster, but it seems that's not in the cards. Will is the definition of grace under fire. Even as his devilish pact master remade his body in her image as punishment, he's gone on with his head held high and remains true to his ideals. His is perhaps the only moral compass I trust in this motley crew, and why I'm willing to spend the last of our days trying to save a group of strangers. I feel like I want to redeem myself in this young man's eyes. Like I've disappointed him with my flirtation. I ask myself, who does he think he is? What care does the lion have for the opinions of the herd? But I've never been that sort of leader. I could never bring myself to be as callous and cutthroat as Mother was. Will is young, he looks up to his leaders, and I was clearly someone he knew to be on a pedestal even before we'd met. And I failed him. I hate this feeling. Perhaps my heart is too soft to be a white lily. Astarion.
Simon's pen hovered above the page of his diary as he tried to think of what he could write that would be appropriate for future generations. Would he want Vladimir to read the thoughts his father had about his traveling companion if this diary were to make it home to Silver Spring one day? Surely not.
Astarion. As a great bard once wrote, "My fever longs still for that which longer nurseth the disease," though I doubt he ever imagined his words to be so literal. Though his fangs are ice, I burn for him still. His touch, there was a ghost over my skin, seizes me fast when he drinks his fill. What madness is this that clutches me in its grasp, draining me of all common sense? Why should I wish to die before my time? If only it might be in his arms. If only those lips might meet mine, ruby red as he returns my blood. There, O bard, is a consummation devoutly to be wished. I'd best leave it there, diary, lest my passions run away with me.
Simon laid down his pen and blotted the page with a sigh. Where was Astarion, anyway? The evening was winding down, and he seemed to have slipped off to hunt without making his nightly visit beforehand. Though they'd agreed to wait for bed, hadn't they? It would be fine, he told himself as he stepped out of his tent and began to climb to the rocky ledge where their little freshwater stream poured down the rock face. He had another appointment to keep at the moment. "You made it," Shadowheart smiled, her voice carrying lightly over the waterfall next to her. "Come here. Sit by me." She gestured to the space on the rocky ledge nearby. A bottle of wine and a silver goblet,
freshly washed after being liberated from the ruins of Wither's old temple, sat at her side. A barrier, but one free to be taken down should she wish. "Did you think I wouldn't show?" Simon asked, lowering himself to the rock and shifting, trying to find a comfortable position. "We just made plans less than an hour ago."
"Lots of people make promises," she said, swirling her goblet, "but few keep them. And with how everyone has been feeling."
"Sad but true," Simon nodded.
"Well, I think a toast is in order. Any suggestions?" she asked, pouring a glass of red. "To life?"
Simon thought for a moment as he accepted his goblet. "To promises kept," Simon offered, smiling wistfully as he raised his glass.
"Very well. To promises kept,"
she smiled, clinking her goblet against his.
"Now, tell me something about yourself. And no tadpoles, dragons, marauding goblins, or anything like that. Something about you,"
she said, her dark smile cutting through the shade. "Is that what you want what may be our last conversation to be about?" Simon asked, chuckling.
"I don't plan on this being my last night alive. If I did, I'd be spending it very differently,"
she smirked, giving Simon a lingering look. "Well, I offered the toast. Now it's your turn," Simon smirked, sipping almost daintily.
"Don't laugh, but I'm not sure there's much to tell. When you worship Shah, secrecy is everything. We'll sacrifice our own memories when ordered to."
"That's dangerous work," Simon said, turning to her. "In my temple, we sacrifice memories as well, but not the whole of one. We prune the vines that are our minds to shape them into the form desired, and we offer up the fruit that grows to our Lord. Cut an entire vine down and you cannot harvest any more fruit from it. And you might not like how the vines around it grow to fill that space, or the weeds that spring up there. Or worse yet, perhaps nothing grows, and that hole in your being remains, stunting you, letting your sanity leak away until he has taken everything, and you're left as a blabbering mad monk."
"Oh, no, my memories are merely suppressed," Shadowheart said, her eyes widening slightly. "When my mission is complete, they'll be restored. Are you really cutting your memory every evening?"
Simon nodded and reached into his pocket, pulling out a tiny point of crystal. It was largely clear, though with a slight tinge of purple toward the base. "That's the memory I excised this evening," he said, holding it out for her to examine. "I, too, don't expect this to be my last night alive, so a normal sacrifice is sufficient."
"It's beautiful,"
Shadowheart remarked, taking it gingerly. It carried the warmth of his pocket, but didn't seem to lose any to the chill night air. "I hope you don't take offense, but it's a memory of your voice," he said sheepishly. "I knew I'd be seeing you later, so it would be a safe thing to sacrifice. It's you saying something," Simon murmured, unable to recall a memory that was currently held in someone else's hand. "Part of your evening prayer. Lady of Loss, guide us. Guide us through the dark and shield us from scrutiny. Weave your shadows over us and protect us in our sorrows," she recited, rotely, rather than praying, as if she was reading a list as quickly as possible. "That's the one," Simon smiled. "See, I knew it would be safe to cut that memory because I would hear it again. Usually I sacrifice things like the wine we drank or the taste of the mince pie. Things I've done before and will do again countless times, which combined make up a life." He calmly swilled his goblet of wine and took a long, meditative sip. "And when I'm able to put all of these sacrifices on the altar and give them wholly, then my Lord will know the sound of your voice," he added, smiling a little wider.
"That's sweet, in a way,"
she said, her brow wrinkling. Probably best not to think about what it meant for a god like Hadar to know the sound of her voice. After all, she knew what it was for Shar to know her so well.
"So, How long have you followed Hadar?
All my life, Simon replied, topping off the glasses. He wasn't sure if alcohol would help or hurt in this situation, but there was no reason he had to be sober when looking down the road to all of their deaths. I was born in the temple. His cheeks warmed slightly as he added, conceived there.
Oh!
Simon let out an embarrassed laugh. I was always meant for temple service, but also to someday be the Lord Fontdale. I was given quite a full plate, even as an infant.
I'll say.
Shadowheart laughed as well. It's as my mother always said, omni altem qui multum datum est, multum queretur habeo.
She really spoke to you in such a way?
Shadowheart chuckled, raising a brow.
In ancient tongues and legalese?
It's one of the nicest things she ever said to me. Simon sighed into his goblet.
What about your father?
I never met him, sadly. Simon sighed. I know he was from Mithranor, in Cormanthia, but that's all. He met my mother and, well, 9 months later there I was. Small. Half-elves with human mothers often are, I understand.
He left you?
Shadowheart asked. He did not, Simon replied sharply. I'm sorry. My father's something of a tender subject. Please forgive my tone. He drank deeply, hoping the alcohol would take the edge off his pain as it so often had before. He and my mother never married, you see, which puts both her and I in a delicate position. Luckily, no cousins or distant relations tried to challenge either my mother or me for our titles and land, but being a bastard son... He sighed, pouring heavily into his goblet again. I think that's enough about me for one night. Now it's your turn.
I'm afraid I still don't have much to offer. Not like that, anyway. And a lot of the little things, they're lost to me right now.
Oh, that's not true. You can't swim and you like night orchids. You told me that once.
And you remembered.
She smiled over the rim of her goblet. I never sacrifice first memories. Simon smiled. They're far too important.
You're sweet. Sweeter than the wine, anyway. But I like something dry on occasion.
Indeed, it would have been fine with Gale's fish this evening, Simon mused. And as a fitting compliment to our new additions, he added, reaching up and gently tapping his newly pierced ear. Plenty of sharp things round camp tonight.
I didn't expect Will to be so sensitive,
Shadowheart laughed. He came out all right on the other end, Simon grinned, and the gold hoop is a fine look on him. Very Athcatlan. The drink and laughter carried on into the night at the top of the waterfall, at least until the bottle was drained. Simon couldn't tell if the pounding in his head was from the wine or the worm, if the dizziness was from drunkenness or death, patiently waiting. He wasn't sure when he had laid down, when he'd tucked his head against his curled arm, the cold sweat sticking unpleasantly in the summer night. He didn't intend for this to be his last night alive. There was still so much to do, and not enough time. So much wasted potential. Potential energy equals mass times height times gravitational field strength. G equals gm over radius squared, where m is increasing, but not enough. Not enough. Not enough. Please, please, not yet. Oh Lord, please spare me. I came just in time. You're transforming. Simon opened his eyes to find himself elsewhere. Shadowheart was nowhere to be seen, the waterfall 1,000,000 miles away and 90 degrees to itself. The calm of this place as ever present as the gentle suffusion of starlight. He'd been here before. And standing above him was a warrior. A paladin. He was resplendent, clad in shining plate armor of gold and red. He was Drow, his skin as dark as jet, eyes like swirled claret, with perfectly pinned and arranged silver-white hair cascading over his shoulders. His face held all the beauty elves are known for, but showed lines belying centuries of survival in the Underdark. One long, wicked scar marred his handsome face, as if someone had meant to cleave his right eye from him entirely. Istorvir. Simon breathed in immediate recognition, his eyes widening and his heart skipping a beat as he gazed up at his valet, his bodyguard, his most trusted man. Wait. No, it can't be. Your ears, your voice. I've heard your voice before. Yes, you have. I've saved you before, the man said, his voice soothing and rich, like spiced honey down an aching throat. It was a voice Simon knew, yes, but not from that mouth. And his ears. They were intact, not mutilated by his matron mother. And I'm here to save you again. From Ceremorphosis? Simon asked, swallowing dryly. He heard his own true voice, soft, lilting, private. A voice none of his companions had heard, save for one. Correct. Don't worry. You will not become a mind flayer. Not while I'm around. I'll protect you. He offered a gauntlet-sheathed hand which Simon took without hesitation. It was such a familiar motion, a hand he'd taken countless times. As a boy being helped up after a skinned knee, as a youth learning to handle blades and staves and shields, as a man exhausted and battered after High Holy Day service in the temple. In the haze of the dream, he comprehended immediately why this Istorvir was so much taller and broader than Simon, when the man himself was a solid head shorter. He swallowed down the words that immediately came to mind, and he looked at the warrior before him. Such a fine sculpture of an elven man. Beautiful, calm, powerful, graceful. Everything Simon had ever aspired to be. We haven't much time, so listen closely. There is great potential within you. It comes from that parasite. Your instinct is to resist the power it gives, but you must accept it. Nurture it, Istorvir advised, giving Simon that knowing look that he was so familiar with. Simon blinked in shock. Nurture it? It's an illithid parasite. I know what it is, and in your hands it shall be a weapon. I will keep it from consuming you, but for the sake of both of us, you must learn to wield it. Why? Why would you have me do something so dangerous, so... Istorvir shook his head and gestured to the dreamscape beyond the little patch of earth where they currently sat, its floating, fluted columns and gently waving golden laurel trees a clear conjuration. Outside of that dreamy temple of the mind, however, was what appeared to be the reality of the astral sea, a sight Simon had visited many times before. But he had never been to an active astral war zone before. Great explosions rocked the crumbling corpses of long-dead would-be once-were gods in this starry graveyard, astral projections and their silvery tethers flitting to and fro, in and out of sight as they dodged one another's silver swords. A massive skull drifted through the neutral cold nearby, its jaw malformed either from nature or history, the blessed bones pockmarked with untold eons of asteroid damage and spiteful bites from passing astral dreadnoughts. Kaleidoscopic energy rippled and rearranged within the hollowed space, a last line of defense, at least in this particular battlefield. What is this? His mind formed the question which, in waking hour, wouldn't have left him, would have waited for further elaboration from the one who clearly intended to give it. A fight for the fate of Faerun. A fight we are losing. For now. You can change that, but only if you embrace your potential. Have faith in me, as I have faith in you, Istorvir said, offering that gentle smile Simon used to only see in evening firelight, when as a child he would pretend to fall asleep and would be carried to bed, tucked in so gently. His heart ached at the tender memory, normally wrapped under so many layers, locked away for safekeeping. Istorvir's attention snapped away to the field, his garnet eyes raptor-like as they flicked to and fro, surveying the battle. I have to go. The enemy is closing in. I will be back, he said, his voice firm but reassuring. The sort of promise he had never had to make in childhood. And yet it felt so familiar, so honest, so comforting. Oh, gods, how Simon wanted that now. With everything happening to him, why couldn't he stay here? Istorvir raised his hand, his eyes shining with astral purple light. A shockwave, that same blinding purple, emanated from the broken remnants of the once divine skull. Simon comprehended in that moment, of course, that his butler, or whoever this was in his most idealized form, was not here. Nor here, but there, inside, commanding, defending. And as the dream temple was completely enveloped in that raw astral power, Simon could feel his mental mooring to the vision being gently prized away, despite the violence of the explosion he had witnessed. Wake now. You'll feel better. I promise. They were the last words he heard that night from his beloved guardian, whose voice was not his, and yet... Simon's eyes fluttered open, and though he was curled up on cold, hard stone, he felt more well-rested than he had since before his abduction, as though he could pull back the curtains and find his bedchambers beyond, Istorvir waiting in the hall to escort him to the dressing room. Instead, he saw Shadowheart lying next to him, her fringe of black hair sweat stuck to her brow, though she looked to be sleeping peacefully, as he felt he must have been moments ago. Shadowheart, Simon whispered, reaching over to gently shake her shoulder. Wake up.
Simon?
She murmured, her eyes slowly opening, her green meeting his, with 10,000 pinpricks of starlight caught between them. She looked so relaxed, soft. He wasn't used to waking up next to a woman who looked at him quite like that.
I was having the strangest dream.
So was I. How are you feeling? He asked tentatively.
Fine. Wait. I feel better, she said, shifting to sit up slightly. We're alive, aren't we?
Shadowheart asked, a moment of uncertainty flashing in her eyes. Simon reached out and gave her a pinch on the arm, earning a squeak of indignation. That didn't hurt, did it? He asked, a mischievous grin on his lips. It was the most he'd smiled in the past several days. He was amazed he remembered how. He caught a glimmer in Shadowheart's eye before she rolled a little closer, grasping his fine linen shirt with her slightly calloused hand, and pressed her lips to his. Hers were dry, slightly chapped from all they'd been through, and most of the balm he had worn on his lips had worn off through the day. Simon moved slowly, his large hand resting at the curve of her waist, his thumb running across the decorative lacing along the hem of her bodice, his lips moving in a subtle echo against hers. He was reminded of the kiss he'd given his wife on their wedding day, how he'd practiced. He was given special dispensation for it, and by the gods, he wanted it to be nice in all meanings of the word. And it was nice. This was nice, too. Kissing a woman was not an unpleasant experience by any means, but not like what his pen had conjured on the page of his diary earlier that night, of cool, pouty lips stained red with his own blood.
That didn't hurt, did it?
She teased in return. Not at all, Simon replied, smiling to ease the moment. Hurt wasn't the right word for something that didn't feel any particular way. Just nice. What did you dream about? He asked, not to abruptly change the topic.
I feel like I shouldn't say,
she said, sitting up slightly and glancing away.
She was just a vision in a dream, but she wouldn't want me to.
Shadowheart stood, brushing herself off gently.
We should get back to the others. Make sure Lae'zel hasn't stabbed everyone in their sleep.